Hi there, my name is Maggie Sullivan. I'm going to be talking to you today about content governance as well as content management and the content management strategy that we use here at our company. So let's just get right into it. As you all know, every website has tons of content and it's fairly easy to produce all of that content, but the problem lies in making that content accessible to everybody. If your end users and your contributors can't easily access and find the content that they need and the content that is relevant to them, all of the content that you have hosted on your site is pretty much just a waste of space then. And that fact makes understanding content governance as well as implementing a content management strategy essential for every single website. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss the major elements of content governance, as well as building a content management strategy. And the content management strategy that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation is the content management strategy that we currently use at our corporation. And that content management strategy relies heavily on a content lifecycle. The content lifecycle is what puts your information and your content through phrases that allows it to be classified and structured with things like metadata and folders and subfolders and taxonomies and etc., which allows all of that content to be stored in a more convenient and really just a more logical way for end users and content creators to access. Without this type of life cycle, all of your information and content would be stored really sporadically and without any purpose, which would make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for those who need or those who want access to that information to find it. Especially for a website like yours, which is dealing with a vast array of different audiences, such as parents and current and prospective students. If you can have a way to tag and categorize all that content so that it will appear in sections of your site that are targeting those different groups and audiences, that would obviously be ideal. Phase one of this content lifecycle process is what we're going to call the request phase. And this phase defines and classifies all of the content in several ways before the content is ever even created. And throughout this phase, you determine several things about the content that you're going to create, such as who's going to own this content. All the content created on your website should have an established owner and creator in order for it to be successfully managed and tracked. When a creator or owner is identifiable, it is so much easier to track changes that they have made, as well as just locate the content in general. Also going to be asking, what is the business purpose of this content? Who is the audience? Who is it targeting? Identifying the purpose of content and having guidelines and classifications in place for creation is going to weed out any type of low-quality user-generated content that you have living on your site that ultimately is just going to devalue your website in general. People are coming to your site for a reason. They want specific content, and there's no point in having user-generated content that's of no value to them. Also, who is going to be working on the content? Clearly establishing what type of resources you have in place as a company for content creation and maintenance is going to ensure that you're always meeting the expectations of your client and that the available resources that you do have, you're able to execute, and that way you can keep up with the demand of information. How successful will the content be? What type of lifespan does it have? Is it evergreen content? Determining the lifespan of content and developing a plan for retention and archival of that content is going to ensure that certain information and content that isn't useful or relevant to your end users or even to your content creators isn't accessible past its lifespan. There's no point for people to be able to access content that's not going to be relevant to them. The next phase of this life cycle is phase two, the content creation phase. As with the request phase that we just went over, the content creation phase also needs to have certain guidelines in place, especially considering the fact that content contributors are often really anxious to get the content live to the users in a timely fashion, which makes the process really vulnerable to management problems. So one of the most important things that all websites should be doing is establishing access. All content should have access rights to prevent users from viewing or accessing content that doesn't concern them in any way. This will allow contributors to easily access the information that they need and only that information. So they won't be exposed to things that they aren't working on. Phase 3 of the content lifecycle is managing the content. Once you have a repository of content created, you're going to need guidelines for managing or updating the metadata and the security restrictions on the content, as well as other elements. One aspect of that is consistently updating content ownership. Changes in ownership of content are inevitable. Content creators are going to move on to different jobs and different projects, or they'll be terminated for whatever reason. And if the content they established isn't updated to reflect new ownership, managing the governance of all the content in general is going to be increasingly more difficult because it's going to be very hard to find that content. And lastly, retiring content, which is going to involve examining all content for material that is no longer relevant or useful, and then archiving and deleting it as you see fit or as is appropriate. Since content has been classified and tagged in the request phase of this life cycle, it's all going to have metadata on it. So this process should be, if everything's been done properly, extremely easy. As easy as simply doing a search for a specific expiration date, author name, etc., and having a list of content come up, and then you can weed through it and see what you want to either archive or maybe delete. And this process is, of course, going to ensure that your end users and your content creators are consistently going to be finding relevant, timely information on your site. And that is the content lifecycle and the content management strategy that we practice here. I hope that you will decide to make a website with us. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.